What's up guys, JV2017 here, and today I'm going to reflect once again on Fallout 4 as a whole. The goal here is to address some legitimate missteps by Bethesda and offer constructive feedback. As much as the more vocal community doesn't like Bethesda right now, we can definitely pull together some useful feedback instead of just tweeting angry things at Pete Hines. The inspiration for this video came from a Reddit post that directed me to the Bethesda forums, where a user named GYMger wrote up a review for Fallout 4 after just completing it for the first time. While I don't agree with his overall assessment of the game, he presented another perspective of the game with a lot of legitimate criticisms that I hadn't really considered before. These are things I've experienced throughout my 500 plus hours with the game, but never really stopped to critically think about and criticize. The post started an interesting conversation both on Reddit and the forums, so I wanted to share my thoughts on the topic. Before we dive into those criticisms, I've linked my 7 months review of Fallout 4 in the description below. It's the most recent video I've uploaded reflecting on Fallout 4 from a review perspective, so if you'd like to hear my thoughts on something in particular that isn't covered in this video, you should definitely check out my review. Also, as always, I've left links to everything referenced in this video, the Reddit post, another YouTube video that I'm going to reference a little bit later, so all of that is in the description below for you. So the first point of criticism is that there's no sense or very little sense of community in this game, and so straight from GYMger, he says that he can't feel comfortable in this game. There's no place to call home, no communities of survivors, nowhere to go home to, nowhere to store stuff, talk to neighbors about their stories, see what they're about. You know, settlements are quite abundant. There's 30 locations throughout the game, but they feel lifeless. They don't feel real. So the idea here is that settlements don't quite equal what would be a populated community in a Fallout universe. For the most part, I think this is really spot on. If Bethesda intended for us to go out, build up a bunch of these settlements, and have them function like actual communities when compared to previous Fallout games, they outright failed. And don't get me wrong, I'm not coming at this from a, building sucks and is stupid, shouldn't be in the Fallout game kind of perspective. It's that Bethesda legitimately failed to capture the feeling that these are real settlements and that they operate like any other settlement would. And just as GYMger describes, I just don't think I've ever felt quite at home in Fallout 4 outside of having a house in Diamond City, which kind of felt like having a house in Megaton in Fallout 3. That could be why I'm not the biggest fan of settlements in general. They're just not an adequate substitute for a realistic community within this fictional world. And that brings us to our next point of criticism, which is that settlements don't really solve that community issue. They don't help the game feel like it's alive and like it was in previous games. So even if you choose to participate in what was supposed to be an optional part of the game, settlements don't solve this issue. They don't feel alive. And just quoting GYMger here, everyone is just settler. That's their name. There's no missions, no personalities, no backstories, nothing like the vampires of Arafu, the kids at Little Lamplight, the teenagers in Big Town, the cannibals in Andale, the cult of Oasis, Dave and his Republic, the slavers in Paradise Falls, the slaves in the Temple of the Union, the ghouls in Underworld, the ghost town of Minefield, and the bustling city of Rivet City, even Girdershade with only 2 people in it. And if you weren't familiar, that's a list of settlement-like communities in Fallout 3. So the idea here is that settlements are ineffective because their inhabitants aren't legitimate NPCs. They just walk around, require resources, become unhappy, and defend settlements. You can give them jobs, but they don't tell you how they feel about those jobs. They have no backgrounds, no ambitions. They're basically robots, almost like synth slaves if you think about it that way. From my perspective, a playthrough without settlement building does feel a lot emptier, in which case, is it actually optional? If I have to build up a good amount of settlements in an attempt to make the game feel more populated, I would argue that it's only optional to the point that the game doesn't lock progress until you build settlements. To make this game feel lively, at least to the point that Fallout 3 did, settlements are basically a necessity, and even then, they aren't effective in that sense. Outside of constructing and choosing how a settlement is built, the settlement system is shallow. I remember coming into the game wanting to invest time into building, thinking that I would get some great weapon recipe or perk out of it. That just didn't happen. Settlements exist for the express purpose of micromanaging the AI and building. That's it. Nothing more unless you're willing to extend your suspension of belief and think, yeah, maybe these guys do have backgrounds. You just can't actually explore them. The next point is that we have mindless groups and or factions. So directly from GYMger, he says that triggermen shoot without warning, gunners attack on sight, and the children of Adam automatically are hostile without asking what your religion is. They don't ask you, do you worship Adam? They just start shooting at you, So in the game, you shoot your way through, you loot, and you move on, and you cycle through that over and over. In New Vegas, you could buy chems from raiders, for example, or at least talk to factions before going to war. And he was playing this game expecting to find some kind of Oasis or Tenpenny Tower from Fallout 3, but instead finding another shooting gallery. I do agree with him that we seem to have a lot of mindless hostile groups that are very much shoot first, ask questions later, and then you can learn more about them through holotapes and terminals, but really you don't have an option in this. They are hostile, they're going to kill you, which is fine in some respects, but it just seems like there's a lot of them in this game in particular. I think we have fairly well thought out factions, and I think a large part of that is the main storyline, core side quests, and the fact that we had lore before this game, but even the Children of Adam roaming around mindlessly shooting at people is pretty strange. In an RPG where player choice is supposed to impact the world around you, there's an awful lot to do with groups that is completely out of your hands. It's predetermined to such a degree that it's hard to stomach when compared to previous Fallout games. I mean, you always have raiders. Raiders are always going to be that group that attack you on sight. That makes sense. Same with super mutants, unless they happen to be friendly. But now it's like we have the gunners, which feel like another raider group, just more well armed. Not to mention, they're all over the place. They are literally everywhere. Moving on, the next point is that we have an empty wasteland, and GY Imgur continues by saying, Easy City Downs, Libertalia, and Combat Zone are full of raiders. Concord, Lexington, and Salem are mostly empty. 3/4 of the map is empty unless you build settlements. Fallout 3 had actual communities outside of those settlements. There's not much life outside of Diamond City, and Good Neighbor just feels hollow as a town settlement kind of location. And finally, the Covenant is just tiny. So this is definitely related to a similar point made earlier in this video, but I just wanted to take a solid count at Fallout 4's communities and compare them to Fallout 3. So a community in this context is a location that can be friendly depending on choices made. So for example, if you're an enemy of the Institute, obviously you can't go in there and they won't be friendly to you, but they can be depending on your choices. So that still counts as a community. So once again, a community in this context is a location that can be friendly depending on your choices made, and it has to have at least 2 people living there. 2 people, honestly, is not really a community, but just for the purposes of this comparison, we're going to say at least 2 people. In Fallout 3, we have Andale, Arafu, Big Town, Canterbury Commons, the Citadel, Girder Shade, Grey Ditch, Little Lamplight, Megaton, Oasis, Paradise Falls, Raven Rock, Riley's Rangers Compound, Republic of Dave, Rivet City, Temple of the Union, Tenpenny Tower, Underworld, Vault 101, and Vault 112, which is Tranquility Lane. In Fallout 4, outside of unpopulated and buildable settlements, so we're not counting places where there's nobody there and it's just a settlement, we have Adam Cat's Garage, Bunker Hill, Cabot House, Covenant, Crater of Adam, Diamond City, Finch Farm, General Atomics Galleria, Good Neighbor, Grey Garden, the Institute, Railroad HQ, Sanctuary Hills, the Pridwin, and Warwick Estate. That's 20 communities in Fallout 3 and 15 in Fallout 4. So that's 25% less communities, which makes a bit of sense if Bethesda intended on settlements replacing some of those. But the thing is, if you want to limit that to at least 5 people living in a community instead of only 2 like I had before, the number for Fallout 3 stays at 18 while Fallout 4 drops to 11. And I may be missing a location or 2 from each game, but I think the point still remains. Fallout 4 is generally more empty unless you populate it yourself. The final point of criticism for this video is the fact that there's no shantification. If you're not familiar, that's okay, because shantification is not a real word. It's a term made up by YouTuber Mr. B-Tongue, and it refers to narratives and stories in general. The general gist is that Fallout games present a non-linear narrative, one that doesn't force you down a single path, and some Fallout games do it better than others. New Vegas is a great example of a game that really pulls this off successfully, and Mr. B-Tongues presents the question, what do they eat, when talking about a community in a Fallout game? The purpose of this silly question is to point to how much attention to atmosphere and detail that developers really give their games. Mr. B-Tongue points out that Bethesda's Fallout 3 doesn't really answer that question in most cases and just assumes that the settlers, wherever they are in those communities, get food by some means. They go and scavenge it. You could just assume anything. But Obsidian's Fallout New Vegas, by comparison, does answer that question in almost every single case. There's a whole area in New Vegas dedicated to feeding the entirety of the strip, and it's called the NCR Sharecropper Farm. There's nothing like that in Fallout 3, and therefore, in terms of shantification, New Vegas pulls it off better than Fallout 3. I'll just quote Mr. B-Tongue here because he explains it much better than anyone else can. To Bethesda, setting is a secondary concern, an environment in which to put gameplay. To Obsidian, setting is part of the story to a point where it's unclear where one stops and the other starts. The player can wander around freely in a complex web of cause and effect without breaking the immersion. Personal story is a lot more plausible because of this, and therefore more enjoyable. I highly recommend that you guys watch Mr. B-Tongue's shantification video, which I've linked in the description below, because that's what I'm referencing, and it's honestly one of the best commentaries I've seen in a while. To GYMGer's point, Fallout 4 doesn't really demonstrate shandification on a level that New Vegas does. It does actually answer the question, what do they eat, ironically enough, because a lot of the places already had a food source nearby, and so, that was something that Bethesda Game Studios definitely thought about, but in other areas, it definitely lacks that attention to detail that, is referenced through shandification. Overall, this is a conversation on what could have been, a reflection on a game that I've spent a ton of time with. I hope Bethesda Game Studios can take some of this information, not directly from this video, but just in general from our community, and improve on their future titles, which a lot of us, including myself, will undoubtedly be playing. A lot of these criticisms did center around the settlement building system, but it wasn't just the fact that we could build in a Fallout game or that it's Minecraft. It's not just a surface argument kind of criticism like that. It is very much deeper than that, and the fact that it seems like settlements have systematically kind of infected the rest of the world. That's just what it feels like, at least, from this new perspective that I have right now. So I'd really like to hear what you guys think about these criticisms. Do you share them? Do you disagree with them? Share what you're thinking in the comment section below. Alright guys, today I shared what I believe to be some legitimate criticisms of Fallout 4. Next time we will cover more Fallout on my channel, so stay tuned for Fallout 4 tips and tricks videos. If you learned something new or enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button, I would really appreciate it, and don't forget to subscribe for more DLC coverage, my survival mode live streams, Bethesda.net mods, and general tips and tricks videos. Talk to you guys next time. Peace!